Karoline Leavitt was not the kind of person who liked to draw attention to herself. She was quiet, thoughtful, and preferred working behind the scenes rather than standing in the spotlight. But that didn't mean she lacked confidence. On the contrary, Karoline knew exactly what she was capable of, even if others often underestimated her because of her age and unassuming demeanor. So when she received the call asking her to represent Whoopi Goldberg in a high-profile defamation lawsuit, she didn't hesitate for long. This was an opportunity, one that could change everything, for better or worse. The case had been making headlines for weeks. A popular entertainment blog accused Whoopi of orchestrating smear campaigns against her co-stars on a nationally televised talk show. The accusations were wild and dramatic, filled with enough drama to keep gossip columns busy for months. According to the blog, Whoopi had allegedly spread rumors about her colleagues to boost her own image and secure more screen time. It sounded like something out of a soap opera, but the public ate it up. Social media exploded with opinions, hashtags trended, and late-night comedians turned the story into punchlines. For Whoopi, however, this was no laughing matter. Her reputation was at stake, and she needed someone who could fight back. That's where Karoline came in. At just 32 years old, she wasn't the obvious choice for such a big case. Most people expected Whoopi to hire one of those flashy celebrity lawyers who appeared on TV all the time, smiling confidently while wearing expensive suits. Instead, she chose Karoline, a relative unknown whose only claim to fame was a string of small victories in lesser-known cases. Some might have called it a risky move, but Whoopi trusted her instincts. And Karoline? Well, she saw it as a chance to prove herself. On the morning of the first day in court, Karoline arrived early. She wore a simple navy blue suit, her dark hair pulled back into a neat ponytail. She carried a leather briefcase filled with notes, documents, and evidence she had spent countless hours preparing. As she walked through the courthouse doors, cameras flashed, reporters shouted questions, and strangers stared. Karoline ignored them all. She kept her head down and focused on the task ahead. Inside the courtroom, things weren't much quieter. The room buzzed with anticipation, packed with journalists, curious onlookers, and even a few celebrities hoping to catch a glimpse of Whoopi herself. Whoopi sat quietly beside Karoline, looking calm but determined. She trusted her lawyer completely, though she couldn't help feeling nervous about how the judge might view the case. Judge Harold Bennett was known for his strict demeanor and old-fashioned views. He disliked anything too flashy or modern, which made him particularly skeptical of celebrity trials. Over the years, he had earned a reputation for ruling against famous defendants, often citing their privileged status as a reason to hold them to higher standards. To say he wasn't thrilled about presiding over this case would be an understatement. When the proceedings began, Judge Bennett wasted no time showing his bias. From the moment Karoline stood up to present her opening statement, he seemed eager to find fault with everything she said. His eyes narrowed as she spoke, his expression growing more disapproving by the second. When she mentioned the possibility of a coordinated attack against Whoopi, he interrupted her mid-sentence. "Ms. Leavitt," he said sharply, "this court deals in facts, not conspiracy theories. Stick to the evidence." Karoline paused, took a deep breath, and nodded politely. "Of course, Your Honor," she replied, her voice steady. "I'll ensure my arguments are grounded in fact." But the interruptions didn't stop there. Every time Karoline tried to introduce new information or highlight inconsistencies in the opposing side's claims, Judge Bennett found a way to shut her down. Whether it was questioning the relevance of certain documents or dismissing witness testimonies as hearsay, he seemed determined to make her job as difficult as possible. The message was clear. He wasn't going to let her win without a fight. Opposing counsel Daniel Carter noticed this immediately and decided to take full advantage of it. Daniel was older than Karoline, with decades of experience under his belt. He had represented some of the biggest names in Hollywood and rarely lost a case. At first glance, he looked like the perfect opponent, confident, polished, and well-prepared. But beneath his polished exterior lay a man who relied heavily on intimidation tactics. He assumed Karoline would crumble under pressure, especially with Judge Bennett breathing down her neck. Daniel started strong, delivering a smooth and convincing opening statement that painted Whoopi as manipulative and self-serving. He spoke passionately about the harm caused by false accusations and the importance of holding public figures accountable. The jury listened intently, nodding along as if they already believed him. When it was Karoline's turn to respond, Daniel leaned back in his chair, smirking slightly as if he had already won. But Karoline wasn't fazed. She approached the podium with purpose, her movements deliberate and controlled. She began by acknowledging the seriousness of the allegations against Whoopi, choosing her words carefully to avoid sounding defensive. Then she launched into her argument, methodically dismantling each point Daniel had made. She pointed out flaws in the timeline of events presented by the opposition, highlighted gaps in their evidence, and raised questions about the credibility of their sources. Her delivery was calm yet compelling, her tone measured but firm. Even Judge Bennett, who had been so quick to criticize her earlier, found himself listening more closely. There was something about the way Karoline spoke, her clarity, her precision, that commanded attention. She wasn't trying to entertain or impress anyone. She was simply doing her job, and doing it exceptionally well. By the end of the first session, the atmosphere in the courtroom had shifted slightly. While Judge Bennett remained skeptical, some members of the jury exchanged glances, clearly intrigued by Karoline's arguments. Reporters scribbled furiously in their notebooks, capturing every word she said. And Whoopi, sitting beside her lawyer, allowed herself a small smile. Maybe, just maybe, they had a fighting chance after all. As the day drew to a close, Karoline gathered her papers and prepared to leave. Outside the courthouse, the crowd was still waiting, shouting questions and snapping photos. Karoline moved quickly, her steps brisk and purposeful. She didn't stop to answer any questions or pose for pictures. All she wanted was to get back to her office, review the day's events, and plan her next move. Sitting alone at her desk later that evening, Karoline reflected on how far she had come. Just a few years ago, she was nothing more than a junior associate, struggling to make a name for herself in a competitive field. Now she was leading one of the most talked-about cases of the year, facing off against seasoned professionals and biased judges alike. It wasn't easy, and there were moments when doubt crept in. But Karoline reminded herself why she became a lawyer in the first place: to seek justice, no matter how daunting the odds. With that thought in mind, she picked up her pen and began drafting her strategy for the next day. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she was ready. The second day of the trial began with a sense of tension hanging in the air. Everyone in the courtroom seemed to be waiting for something explosive to happen, though no one could quite put their finger on what it might be. Karoline Leavitt arrived, early just as she had the day before, carrying her leather briefcase and wearing the same navy blue suit. She looked calm, almost serene, but there was a sharpness in her eyes that betrayed her determination. She knew this case wasn't going to be easy, especially with Judge Harold Bennett's obvious bias against her, but she also knew she couldn't afford to let his attitude derail her focus. As the proceedings got underway, Daniel Carter wasted no time trying to seize control of the narrative. He called his first witness, a young man named Eric Dawson, who claimed to have inside knowledge about the alleged smear campaign orchestrated by Whoopi Goldberg. Eric was nervous as he took the stand, fidgeting with his tie and avoiding direct eye contact with the jury. Despite his unease, Daniel guided him through a series of questions designed to paint Whoopi as manipulative and calculating. "Mr. Dawson," Daniel asked smoothly, "can you tell the court what you overheard during your time working at the talk show?" Eric hesitated for a moment before nodding. "Yes," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "I heard Whoopi talking to someone on the phone about spreading rumors about her co-stars. She sounded really angry, like she wanted to make sure everyone knew how difficult they were to work with." Karoline listened carefully, her expression neutral. When it was her turn to cross-examine Eric, she approached the podium with quiet confidence. Instead of attacking him outright, she started with simple, straightforward questions. "Mr. Dawson," she began, "how long did you work at the talk show?" "About 6 months," Eric replied, still looking uneasy. "And during those 6 months, how often did you interact directly with Ms. Goldberg?" Karoline pressed. "Not very much," Eric admitted. "Mostly I just saw her around the studio." "So you wouldn't say you had a close relationship with her, would you?" Karoline continued, her tone polite but firm. "No, not really," Eric muttered. Karoline nodded, letting the silence stretch for a moment before moving on. "Now, Mr. Dawson, you mentioned overhearing a phone call. Can you describe where you were when this happened?" "I was in the hallway outside her dressing room," Eric explained. "And how far away were you from her door?" Karoline asked. "Maybe 10 feet? Maybe less?" 10 feet, Karoline repeated thoughtfully. "That's quite a distance. Did you hear both sides of the conversation clearly, or only parts of it?" Eric shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Just parts of it. So it's possible you misunderstood what was being said, isn't it?" Karoline suggested gently. "I guess so," Eric mumbled, his earlier confidence fading. By the time Karoline finished questioning him, Eric's testimony felt shaky at best. The jury exchanged glances, some of them frowning as if they were starting to doubt the reliability of the witness. Daniel noticed this too and quickly moved to call his next witness, hoping to regain momentum. But Karoline's performance had already planted seeds of doubt in the minds of those watching. Later that afternoon, Karoline decided to introduce new evidence, a series of emails between the blogger who broke the story and executives at a rival network. These emails, which she had uncovered after weeks of digging, hinted at a coordinated effort to tarnish Whoopi's reputation. They contained phrases like, "take her down," and "make sure this sticks," along with references to financial incentives for publishing damaging content. It was explosive material, the kind of thing that could completely shift the direction of the trial. When Karoline stood up to present the emails, Judge Bennett immediately raised objections. "Ms. Leavitt," he said sharply, "this is hearsay. You know very well that these documents cannot be admitted without proper authentication." Karoline didn't flinch. "Your Honor," she replied calmly, "these emails are directly relevant to proving the existence of a conspiracy against my client. If we are allowed to authenticate them through further investigation, I believe they will provide critical insight into the motivations behind the accusations." Judge Bennett scowled but reluctantly agreed to allow limited discussion of the emails for now. However, he made it clear that he would rule against admitting them as official evidence unless Karoline could produce stronger verification. This ruling frustrated Karoline, but she refused to let it discourage her. She pressed forward, explaining the significance of each email in detail and emphasizing the patterns of behavior they revealed. One person paying close attention to Karoline's arguments was Rachel Meyer, a journalist covering the trial for a major news outlet. Rachel had been skeptical of Karoline at first, assuming she was out of her depth in such a high-profile case. But as the days went on, Rachel found herself increasingly impressed by the younger lawyer's skill and composure. There was something about the way Karoline handled herself, her ability to stay calm under pressure, her knack for finding weaknesses in the opposition's case, that set her apart from other attorneys Rachel had observed. During a recess, Rachel approached Karoline near the courthouse steps. "Ms. Leavitt," she said cautiously, holding out a notebook. "Do you have a moment to talk?" Karoline glanced at her briefly before nodding. "Of course. What do you need?" Rachel hesitated, then plunged ahead. "I've been following the case closely, and I can't help noticing how Judge Bennett seems to rule against you at every turn. Do you think there's a reason for that?" Karoline sighed, glancing around to ensure no one else was listening. "To be honest, I've wondered the same thing," she admitted. "His rulings feel unusually harsh even for someone with his reputation. It's almost like he has a personal stake in seeing my client lose." Rachel's eyes widened slightly. "A personal stake? You mean, like a conflict of interest?" "It's just a theory," Karoline said quickly, lowering her voice. "But if I were you, I'd look into his background. See if there's any connection between him and the people involved in this case. Rachel nodded slowly, sensing that Karoline was onto something important. Thank you, she said. I'll see what I can find. Over the next few days, Rachel threw herself into researching Judge Bennett's history. She combed through public records, interviewed former colleagues, and dug deep into online databases. What she discovered shocked her. Judge Bennett had once served as a consultant for the rival network implicated in the conspiracy. Though he claimed his involvement ended years ago, financial documents revealed ongoing payments from the company, suggesting a hidden agenda. Armed with this information, Rachel wrote an exposé detailing Judge Bennett's ties to the opposing side. The article was published late one evening, just as the trial was entering its third week. By morning, it had gone viral, sparking outrage across social media and putting immense pressure on the court to address the allegations. Back in the courtroom, the mood had shifted dramatically. Reporters buzzed with excitement, sharing snippets of Rachel's article and speculating about what it meant for the trial. Even some members of the jury seemed unsettled, whispering among themselves during breaks. Karoline watched all of this unfold with a mixture of satisfaction and caution. She knew the revelation about Judge Bennett was a game-changer, but she also understood that winning the case would require more than just exposing bias. It would require proving Whoopi's innocence beyond any shadow of a doubt. As the day came to a close, Karoline returned to her office, exhausted but determined. She pored over the latest developments, reviewing Rachel's article and considering how best to use it in court. For the first time since the trial began, she allowed herself to feel a flicker of hope. The road ahead was still long and uncertain, but she was ready to face whatever challenges lay in store. Whatever happened next, one thing was clear. Karoline Leavitt was not going down without a fight. The fourth week of the trial began with a renewed sense of purpose. Judge Laura Simmons had taken full control of the courtroom, and her presence brought a level of clarity and fairness that had been missing under Judge Harold Bennett. The atmosphere shifted noticeably. Karoline Leavitt felt more confident, knowing she could present her arguments without fear of bias or unfair rulings. For the first time in weeks, it seemed like the truth might finally have a chance to shine. Karoline started the day by revisiting some of the key evidence she had introduced earlier. She walked the jury through the timeline of events, connecting the dots between the rival network's actions and the false accusations against Whoopi Goldberg. Her presentation was meticulous, each piece of evidence building on the last. She used simple language, carefully avoiding legal jargon so the jury could follow along easily. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Karoline said, standing at the podium with her notes spread neatly in front of her. "What we're looking at here is not just a series of coincidences. These emails, these financial records, and the testimony we've heard all point to one thing: a deliberate effort to harm my client's reputation for profit." She paused for effect, letting her words sink in. The jurors exchanged glances, their expressions thoughtful. Some nodded slightly as if agreeing with her logic. Karoline continued, pointing to specific phrases in the emails that highlighted the rival network's motivations. One email in particular stood out. It read, "We need to make sure this sticks. Goldberg is a liability." Karoline emphasized how this statement directly contradicted the claims made by the opposing side, that the accusations were based on genuine concerns. Daniel Carter, representing the other party, tried to intervene. "Your Honor," he interjected, "this is conjecture. Ms. Leavitt is asking the jury to assume too much from vague statements." Judge Simmons raised an eyebrow but didn't immediately dismiss his objection. Instead, she turned to Karoline. "Ms. Leavitt, can you provide further context for these statements?" Karoline nodded. "Absolutely, Your Honor." She called up another witness, Rachel Meyer, the journalist whose exposé had exposed Judge Bennett's ties to the rival network. Rachel took the stand, her hand steady despite the weight of the moment. Karoline guided her through questions about her investigation, asking her to explain how she uncovered the connections between the judge and the network. "I reviewed public records and cross-referenced them with internal documents leaked to me by a whistleblower," Rachel explained. "It became clear that Judge Bennett had ongoing financial relationships with executives at the rival network. This raised serious questions about his impartiality. The jury listened intently, their faces reflecting a mix of surprise and concern. Even Daniel seemed uneasy, shifting in his seat as if unsure how to counter the growing narrative against his side. When Rachel finished testifying, Karoline thanked her and returned to her argument, tying everything together. "This isn't just about one person or one decision," Karoline told the court. "It's about a pattern of behavior designed to discredit my client for personal gain. And now, thanks to Ms. Meyer's work, we see that even the presiding judge may have been part of this scheme." The impact of her words rippled through the room. The jury appeared increasingly convinced, while Daniel struggled to regain footing. He attempted to discredit Rachel's testimony, accusing her of having ulterior motives for publishing her article. But Karoline was quick to shut him down. "Mr. Carter," she said sharply, "are you suggesting that exposing corruption is somehow unethical? If Ms. Meyer hadn't done her job, none of us would know about Judge Bennett's conflict of interest. Are you saying we should ignore the truth because it's inconvenient for your case?" Daniel stammered, unable to respond effectively. Judge Simmons gave him a stern look before moving on to the next phase of the trial. As the days went by, the pressure mounted on Daniel and his team. Their witnesses faltered under Karoline's sharp questioning. One executive from the rival network, who had initially denied any involvement in the smear campaign, eventually admitted under oath that he had authorized payments to the blogger. His admission came after Karoline presented bank statements showing large sums of money transferred to the blogger's account shortly after the accusations against Whoopi went public. "You authorized these payments, didn't you?" Karoline asked, holding up the document for the jury to see. The executive hesitated, sweat forming on his forehead. "Yes," he finally admitted. "But I didn't think it would escalate like this." "What did you think it would do?" Karoline pressed. "Improve my client's image? Boost her career? Or was it always meant to hurt her?" The man looked down, avoiding eye contact. I don't know." The jury scribbled furiously in their notebooks, capturing every detail. By now it was becoming painfully obvious that the accusations against Whoopi were baseless and malicious. Yet Daniel refused to back down. In a desperate attempt to salvage his position, he shifted tactics, focusing instead on attacking Karoline personally. "Ms. Leavitt is young and inexperienced," Daniel argued during one session. "She may be clever, but does that mean she understands the complexities of this case? Should we trust someone so green to guide us toward the truth?" His words fell flat. The jury had already seen enough of Karoline's skill and professionalism to know better. Rather than damaging her credibility, his comments only made him appear petty and grasping. Judge Simmons frowned, clearly unimpressed. "Mr. Carter," she said sternly, "attacks on opposing counsel are not relevant to this case. Stick to the facts or I will hold you in contempt." Daniel flushed red but said nothing more. From that point on, his arguments grew weaker, his confidence visibly shaken. It was clear to everyone in the courtroom that he was fighting a losing battle. Outside the courthouse, the media frenzy continued to grow. News outlets covered every twist and turn of the trial, often praising Karoline's performance. Social media buzzed with support for Whoopi, with hashtags like "Truth Wins" or "Karoline for the Win" trending worldwide. Public opinion had swung dramatically in favor of Whoopi, putting immense pressure on the remaining defendants to settle or face humiliation. By the end of the week, the prosecution's case was in shambles. Their witnesses had crumbled, their evidence had been debunked, and their credibility was in tatters. Meanwhile, Karoline had built an airtight argument that left little room for doubt. As she prepared for closing statements, she felt a deep sense of satisfaction, not because she wanted to gloat, but because she knew she had fought hard for justice. On the final day of testimony, Karoline stood before the jury one last time. She spoke slowly and deliberately, ensuring every word landed with precision. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, "this case is about more than just one person or one accusation. It's about the power of truth versus lies, integrity versus manipulation. My client, Whoopi Goldberg, has spent decades entertaining audiences, speaking her mind and standing up for what she believes in. Yet she has been targeted by people who value profit over honesty. They thought they could silence her, tarnish her reputation, and get away with it. But they underestimated two things: the strength of my client and the resilience of justice. Her voice softened slightly as she concluded. All I ask is that you consider the evidence objectively. Look at the facts, not the noise. Decide for yourselves whether these accusations have merit or whether they are part of a calculated plan to destroy an innocent woman's life. Thank you. When Karoline sat down, the courtroom was silent. Even Daniel seemed stunned, unable to muster a strong rebuttal. As the trial moved into deliberations, the mood was tense yet hopeful. For Karoline, it was a moment of reflection. She glanced at Whoopi, who gave her a small, grateful smile. No matter what happened next, Karoline knew she had done everything she could, and sometimes that was enough. The final days of the trial felt like a culmination of everything Karoline Leavitt had worked toward. The courtroom was quieter now, the chaos replaced by a sense of anticipation. Everyone knew the end was near. The jury would soon deliver their verdict. But before that happened, there was one last hurdle to cross: closing arguments. Daniel Carter stood first, his usual confidence replaced by a strained effort to appear composed. He spoke slowly, choosing his words carefully, but his voice lacked conviction. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, he began, while my opponent has presented an impressive case, I urge you not to lose sight of the facts. This lawsuit is about defamation, plain and simple. Whether or not there were ulterior motives behind the accusations against Ms. Goldberg, the question remains: did she suffer harm as a result? And if so, who is truly responsible? He went on to rehash old arguments, trying to cast doubt on the evidence Karoline had introduced. But his delivery fell flat. His attempts to discredit Rachel Meyer's investigation and downplay the significance of the emails came across as desperate. Even Judge Simmons seemed unimpressed, her expression neutral but sharp as she listened. When it was Karoline's turn, she approached the podium with quiet determination. She didn't raise her voice or resort to theatrics. Instead, she spoke directly to the jury, her tone calm and sincere. This case isn't just about Whoopi Goldberg, she said, meeting each juror's eyes in turn. It's about fairness. It's about holding people accountable when they abuse power for personal gain. What we've seen here, emails, financial records, witness testimonies, is proof of a deliberate plan to hurt my client. Not because she deserved it, but because someone else stood to benefit. Karoline paused, letting her words hang in the air. Think about the timeline, she continued. The accusations surfaced at a time when Whoopi was at the peak of her career, using her platform to speak out on issues she cared about. Suddenly, stories emerged painting her as manipulative and self-serving. These stories weren't true, they were manufactured. Why? Because some people didn't want her voice to be heard. Her voice softened as she concluded. Whoopi didn't ask for this fight. She didn't seek out controversy or drama. All she wanted was to do her job and live her life with dignity. Instead, she found herself facing lies designed to destroy her reputation. Today you have the power to set things right. You can send a message that truth matters, that integrity matters, and that no one, not even powerful corporations, is above the law. When Karoline finished speaking, the courtroom was silent. The jurors exchanged glances, their faces thoughtful. Daniel didn't bother with a rebuttal. He simply nodded curtly and sat down. Judge Simmons instructed the jury to begin deliberations, reminding them of their duty to remain impartial and consider all the evidence carefully. Then the room emptied, leaving only uncertainty in its wake. Waiting for the verdict was agonizing. Karoline spent hours pacing her office, replaying every moment of the trial in her mind. Had she done enough? Was the evidence strong enough to sway the jury? She tried to distract herself by organizing files and reviewing notes, but her thoughts kept drifting back to the courtroom. Whoopi called her twice, offering words of encouragement, but even she sounded nervous. Outside, the world buzzed with speculation. News outlets ran constant updates analyzing every possible outcome. Social media users debated whether the jury would side with Whoopi or rule in favor of the defendants. Protesters still gathered outside the courthouse, though. Their numbers had dwindled slightly. For Karoline, the waiting felt endless. Finally, after 2 long days, the jury reached a decision. When the bailiff announced that the verdict was ready, the courtroom filled quickly. Reporters jostled for seats, cameras flashed, and the tension in the air was almost unbearable. Karoline took her place beside Whoopi, gripping her briefcase tightly to steady her nerves. Judge Simmons entered the room and called for order. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" she asked. The foreman, a middle-aged man named Robert, stood up and cleared his throat. "Yes, Your Honor, we have." A hush fell over the room as everyone leaned forward, eager to hear what he would say. Next, in the matter of Whoopi Goldberg versus the defendants, we find in favor of Ms. Goldberg. We further find that the accusations against her were false and defamatory, and we award damages in the amount of $12 million. The courtroom erupted into cheers. Whoopi gasped, tears streaming down her face as she hugged Karoline tightly. Reporters scrambled to capture the moment, shouting questions and snapping photos. Even Judge Simmons allowed herself a small smile, nodding approvingly at the outcome. For Karoline, the victory felt surreal. She had poured every ounce of energy into this case, and now it was over. As the crowd dispersed and the noise faded, she found herself reflecting on how far she had come. Just weeks ago, she had been an unknown lawyer thrust into the spotlight, facing off against seasoned opponents and biased judges. Now she was being hailed as a hero, a legal genius who had taken on a corrupt system and won. Later that evening, Karoline met with Whoopi in a quiet restaurant to celebrate. Over dinner, Whoopi thanked her profusely, promising to use her platform to advocate for reforms in the justice system. "You've given me more than just a win," she said, raising her glass. "You've reminded me why fighting for what's right matters." Karoline smiled, feeling a deep sense of fulfillment. "I couldn't have done it without you," she replied. "Your strength inspired me every step of the way." As the night wore on, Karoline stepped outside for some fresh air. The city lights twinkled around her, casting a warm glow over the streets. She thought about the journey ahead, new cases, new challenges, new opportunities to make a difference. Whatever lay in store, she knew she was ready. For now, though, she allowed herself a moment of peace, savoring the hard-earned victory. The third week of the trial began with a storm brewing both inside and outside the courtroom. Rachel Meyer's exposé about Judge Harold Bennett's ties to the rival network had ignited a firestorm of controversy. The article was everywhere, on television, in newspapers, and all over social media. Protesters gathered outside the courthouse holding signs that read, "Justice for Whoopi and bias has no place in court." Reporters shouted questions at anyone who walked through the courthouse doors, desperate for updates on how the case would proceed. Inside the courtroom, the tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. Karoline Leavitt arrived early as usual, her expression calm despite the chaos swirling around her. She carried a folder filled with copies of Rachel's article, along with additional evidence she had gathered overnight. She knew this was the moment she had been preparing for, the chance to expose Judge Bennett's bias and demand accountability. But she also knew it wouldn't be easy. Judges didn't like being called out, especially in public, and Bennett was no exception. When the proceedings began, Karoline stood up and addressed the court. "Your Honor," she said, her voice steady and respectful, "I'd like to file a motion to recuse you from this case based on newly uncovered evidence suggesting a conflict of interest." Judge Bennett's face turned red almost instantly. He slammed his gavel onto the desk, though the sound did little to quiet the murmurs rippling through the room. "Ms. Leavitt," he barked, "this is highly inappropriate. I assure you, I have no personal stake in this matter." "With respect, Your Honor," Karoline replied, unfazed by his anger. "The evidence suggests otherwise. According to documents obtained by journalist Rachel Meyer, you have maintained financial ties with the rival network implicated in this conspiracy. These ties raise serious questions about your ability to remain impartial." The courtroom erupted into whispers. Some jurors exchanged uneasy glances while others leaned forward, clearly intrigued. Even Daniel Carter, who had spent most of the trial looking smug, now appeared rattled. He hadn't anticipated this turn of events, and it showed. Judge Bennett tried to brush off the accusations. "These claims are baseless," he snapped. "I won't dignify them with a response. Motion denied." But Karoline wasn't finished. "If Your Honor refuses to step aside voluntarily, then I respectfully request that this court refer the matter to a higher authority for review. My client deserves a fair trial, free from any appearance of bias." Her words hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. For a moment there was silence. Then slowly the murmuring started again, louder this time. The jury seemed particularly affected, their expressions ranging from disbelief to outright concern. One juror, an older woman named Linda, scribbled something on her notepad and passed it to the person sitting next to her. Whatever she wrote caused a ripple of agreement among the group. Outside the courtroom, Rachel's article continued to dominate the headlines. News anchors debated whether Judge Bennett should recuse himself, while legal experts weighed in on the implications of his alleged conflict of interest. Social media users flooded platforms like Twitter and Instagram with hashtags like #recuse Bennett and fair trial for Whoopi. Public opinion was shifting rapidly, and the pressure on the court system grew unbearable. By midweek, the judiciary stepped in. A senior judge from another district reviewed the evidence against Bennett and decided to remove him from the case. In his place, they appointed Judge Laura Simmons, a no-nonsense jurist known for her fairness and sharp intellect. When Judge Simmons entered the courtroom for the first time, the atmosphere changed immediately. Gone was the tension and hostility that had defined Bennett's tenure. Instead, there was a sense of relief and perhaps even hope that justice might finally prevail. Judge Simmons wasted no time asserting her authority. After introducing herself to the court, she addressed the issue of bias head-on. "This case has attracted significant attention, much of it unwarranted," she said firmly. "However, the allegations regarding Judge Bennett cannot go unaddressed. Let me make one thing clear. This court will operate with complete transparency and integrity moving forward. Any attempts to undermine that principle will not be tolerated." Her words sent a clear message to everyone involved. For Karoline, it felt like a turning point. With Judge Simmons presiding, she believed she could present her case without fear of unfair rulings or hidden agendas. And judging by the nods of approval from the jury, she wasn't the only one who felt that way. As the trial resumed under Judge Simmons's watchful eye, Karoline seized the opportunity to dismantle the opposition's arguments piece by piece. She began by revisiting the emails between the blogger and the rival network executives, which Judge Simmons allowed to be admitted as evidence after proper authentication. Karoline walked the jury through each email, highlighting key phrases and explaining their significance. She pointed out patterns of behavior, such as the timing of the blog posts coinciding with major decisions at the talk show, and drew connections between the executive's directives and the false accusations. Against Whoopi, Daniel Carter struggled to keep up. His earlier confidence had evaporated, replaced by frustration and desperation. Every time he tried to counter Karoline's arguments, she responded with calm logic and irrefutable facts. During one particularly heated exchange, Daniel accused Karoline of cherry-picking information to fit her narrative. "Ms. Leavitt," he said sharply, "you're presenting these emails as if they're the whole story, but they're just fragments. You haven't proven anything beyond reasonable doubt." Karoline smiled faintly, her expression patient but firm. "Mr. Carter, I'm not asking the jury to take my word for it. I'm asking them to look at the evidence objectively. If these fragments, as you call them, form a coherent pattern when pieced together, doesn't that suggest something larger at play? Something intentional?" The jury nodded slowly, clearly swayed by her reasoning. Even Judge Simmons seemed impressed, leaning forward slightly as she listened to Karoline's arguments. It was becoming increasingly obvious that the tide was turning in favor of Whoopi Goldberg. Meanwhile, Daniel's witnesses crumbled under Karoline's cross-examination. One by one, they revealed inconsistencies in their testimonies or admitted to having ulterior motives for testifying against Whoopi. By the end of the week, the prosecution's case looked weaker than ever. The once smooth operation orchestrated by Daniel was unraveling before everyone's eyes. Outside the courtroom, the media frenzy reached new heights. Rachel Meyer published a follow-up article detailing the dramatic shift in the trial's momentum. She praised Karoline's tenacity and strategic brilliance, calling her a force to be reckoned with. Other journalists echoed her sentiments, dubbing Karoline the lawyer who took down Bennett, and speculating about what this victory might mean for her career. Back in her office late one night, Karoline sat alone, surrounded by stacks of papers and empty coffee cups. She stared at the glowing screen of her laptop, replaying the day's events in her mind. Despite the progress she had made, she knew the fight wasn't over yet. There were still hurdles to overcome, strategies to refine, and arguments to prepare. But for the first time since the trial began, she allowed herself to feel a flicker of optimism. She thought about Whoopi, who had placed her trust in Karoline despite the odds stacked against them. She thought about the jurors who had started to see through the lies and manipulations of the opposing side, and she thought about Judge Simmons, whose commitment to fairness gave her hope that justice could still prevail. Karoline leaned back in her chair and closed her eyes for a moment, letting the weight of everything settle over her. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but she was ready. Whatever happened next, she vowed to give it her all, for Whoopi, for the truth, and for herself.